Hi everyone, welcome back to the Let's Slam podcast. It's your boy Baho, and today we are going to talk a little bit about Hmong history. At the time of this recording, it is February 13th, and it's actually my birthday today. I just turned 27 and I'm absolutely terrified of 30, but I'm just so happy to be alive another year. Moving forward, I have had such an interest in Hmong history for the past few years, and if you listened to my last podcast, I go into a little bit of detail into how that happened. My uncle is a Hmong historian, and his work really inspired me to look more deeply into Hmong Ginku, or Hmong history. We have such a rich and also tragic past that has molded us into who we are today and defines what being Hmong really means. In today's episode, we're going to take a dive into the three most recent Miao rebellions of China. The first being from 1735 to 36, the second from 1795 to 1806, and the final and longest rebellion from 1854 to 1873. Although we'll be talking about Hmong history today, the term Miao doesn't only refer to the Hmong ethnic minority. Miao is a general term that gained official status in China in 1949, used by the Chinese government to group a linguistically and culturally similar group of people. Something that I like to say is all Hmong are considered Miao, but not all Miao consider themselves Hmong. The term was often applied to people that were not of Han origin, and later became a name that became derogatory in nature. In ancient Ming texts, it became synonymous with the term barbarian, and was used to refer to Miao people who refused to submit to Chinese rule. These rebellions originated from high ethnic tensions between Miao and Han Chinese ethnic minorities, heavy taxation, and encroachment of land by Han settlers and the Chinese government. During the Qing dynasty, the last dynasty in the imperial history of China that lasted from 1644 to 1912, the fourth emperor, Yongcheng, sought to strengthen state control in the southwestern regions that the previous Ming dynasty failed to establish. The emperor replaced southern semi-independent chieftains of differing tribes with Qing officials. Following this, Prince Ortai was sent to pacify these regions through several military campaigns. By the year 1735, civil unrest reached its climax from misrule and extortion that led to armed conflict between the local ethnic minorities and the Han Chinese. And knowing that defeat could be certain, many men went as far as to kill their own families so that they had nothing to lose. Nothing for the Chinese government to use against them for their retaliation. In the eyes of the oppressed, absolute sacrifice in order to obtain freedom was a must. Just imagine how desperate you have to be in order to kill your wife and children so that they may face a more honorable death than being killed, captured, enslaved, or worse by the Qing dynasty. This is one of the many examples of the tough choices our ancestors had to make along the way to reclaim our freedom. The Miao Rebellion of 1735 to 1736 began in Taigong, which then spread to Liping County and the capital Duyan of Qiannan-Buye and Miao Autonomous Prefecture of Guizhou, which still stands to this day and has also seen an economic boom following some development, which in turn has allowed Duyan to grow several times its size. I would actually love to visit some of these autonomous regions in China one day. For those of you who aren't quite sure what an autonomous region is, it's basically an area of a country that is allowed to have some degree of autonomy or freedom from a ruling external authority, in this case, the Chinese government. General things you'd find in autonomous regions are that they are in very distinct locations and are usually heavily populated by a single ethnic minority. And it's pretty cool. Just think about how much history a Miao or Hmong autonomous region has. Being able to try the local food, see the culture, and hear the different dialects that connects all of us. It is definitely interesting to think about. So, going back into the rebellion, Qing authorities found it quite difficult to quell the rebellion, and so they looked into reaching an agreement with the rebels. However, the fifth emperor of the Qing dynasty, Emperor Qianlong, did not fancy that idea, and instead appointed one of his most experienced officers, Zhang Guangxi, to mercilessly suppress the rebellion. The emperor's choice to appoint Zhang proved to be a strategic move. The Miao rebels would eventually hold their last stand at Niupidajing in the year 1736, only a year after the uprising began. 1,200 Miao forts were destroyed by the Qing armies, and estimates claim over 18,000 Miao warriors were killed. Zhang's military campaign lasted from February of 1736 to November of the same year. Half a century of peace followed after the suppression of the Miao rebellion until the next revolt began in 1795. That will last for 11 years. The Miao rebellion of 1795 to 1806 was an anti-Qing uprising in Hunan and Guizhou, areas that still have a pretty high density of Hmong people to this day. The second revolt stemmed from tyranny rather than forced assimilation towards non-Han Chinese minorities. A term that was actually used by the Chinese for non-Han Chinese that gave in to imperial rule were called cooked. The ones who openly defied them were called raw. In the past, dynasties would find or at least establish peace with ethnic minorities through allowing them to have titles such as chieftains. In return, they would have to pay taxes and refrain from revolting or uprising in their given territories. Peace would soon end after ethnic Han would immigrate into the best arable lands that were occupied by other minorities. This led to tension once again, as having arable land is a necessity of any group of peoples to maintain their survival. In 1795, another Miao rebellion broke out, this time led by cousins Xi Liudeng and Xi Sanbao. Wu Longdeng and their chief leader, Wu Bayue, or in Hmong, his name would be Wu Baiye, who is said to have been a Hmong king who hailed from the village of Pinglong near today's Fenghuang city. Wu Bayue was related to Sanbao through marriage. A niece of Wu Baiyue's cousin, Wu Longdeng, was Sanbao's wife. It is said that the revolt was started by Liu Deng on February 5th, 1795, after Qing officials conducted a raid on his small settlement. With the leader of the rebellion, Wu Baiyue, being from Fenghuang City in Hunan Province, the main area of fighting stayed relatively inside Hunan Province, with some exceptions in Guizhou Province. In response to the uprising, the Qing dynasty mobilized banner troops, Green Standard battalions, and local militias. It took 11 years to quell this rebellion. The aftermath was forced assimilation. Traditional dress of all those who opposed the Qing dynasty was forbidden to be worn, and ethnic segregation was enforced. In 1854, the largest and final Miao rebellion would begin. The rebellion of 1854 to 1873 began in Guizhou province. Origins for this revolt came from, again, long-standing ethnic tensions with the Han Chinese, poverty in ethnic populations, heavy taxations, and competition for arable land against Han settlers. The birth of this rebellion was allowed by a separate rebellion known as the Taiping Rebellion of 1850 to 1864. It was a civil war that was fought between the Manchu-led Qing dynasty and the ethnic Han, Hakka-led Taiping Heavenly Kingdom rebel state. This really forced the Qing dynasty to withdraw their troops from ethnic regions to focus their efforts on the Taiping Rebellion, which in turn asked for heavy taxation to fund those efforts. During this rebellion, we had one of our most notable victories in Hmong history at the Battle of Huangpiao against the Chu army in May of 1869. This is a Miao account of the Battle of Huangpiao. After 18 years of chaos, the Chinese army came from the east, from the direction of Wulong district. Huangpiao was on the old path between Wulong and Jiuzhou. Miao forces gathered on the ridge at Huangpiao. Bao Dadu was there with Zhang Xiumei and some others. When the Chinese came, they suddenly saw hundreds of Miao banners fringing the hills. The Miao came down from two directions and pushed the Chinese to the top of the cliff as if they were herding ducks. Many people died down there, by the outcrop and down in front. End quote. So throughout history after the battle, arrowheads, guns, which I would imagine were muskets, and even skeletons have been found at the old battleground. Preceding the battle, over 15,000 Qing troops were deployed under the three generals Su Yuanchen, Deng Zihuan, and Huang Rencang. The Qing army reached Huangpiao on May 3rd and attacked immediately. A Miao decoy party was sent out to engage them. They feigned retreat and lured the Chinese onto a narrow plateau. The Qing army fell for the bait, and they sent out reinforcements hoping to finish off the Miao army. They ended up being heavily outflanked and swiftly met with cannon fire and rolling rocks from the hillside where the Miao army was. The Qing army was eventually led to a trail of a clifftop where the entire army would be slaughtered. Estimates claim that 12,000 Qing government troops were killed. Other sources claim 20,000. Whatever the numbers are, this humiliating defeat of the Chinese threw back the pacification of Guizhou by 18 months, if not more. After the Qing dynasty quelled the Taiping Rebellion, they would eventually do the same to the Miao Rebellion, making it the last rebellion our people would ever participate in. This would lead to the larger Hmong diaspora of the last 2 centuries into Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, and other southern countries. Another notable thing to mention about the aftermath of this rebellion is that in response to this rebellion, the Chinese would build the Southern Great Wall, called 中国南方长城 in Chinese, or in Hmong, 说躲跳, to protect the local Han populations from further Miao attacks. A part of our history is interwoven into the construction of the Great Wall of China. Very interesting to say the least. I hope this brief look into Hmong history was interesting for you guys. It was a lot of information to consolidate into a short episode. Perhaps one day I'll do a long form analysis of these rebellions and maybe do a deep dive into the older Miao rebellions of the earlier Ming Dynasty of the 14th and 15th centuries. Looking back at our history always makes me appreciate everything our ancestors did for us. They did not die for nothing. We truly are survivors. We are Hmong. Alright guys, this wraps up today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I will see you guys again on the next episode of the Let's Slam podcast. See you guys.